Night had wrapped the cobblestone street in a quiet blanket, and a single gas lamp hummed low outside a tiny sewing shop. Inside, the scent of pin oil and boiled wool mixed with the faint sweet of lemon soap, and a clock on the wall ticked as if measuring breaths. Leela was 23, fingers calloused from years of mending collars, hair gathered in a loose bun, eyes that learned to read sorrow in fabric folds. She had been closing when the bell over the door jangled, a thin, surprised sound. She opened to cold air and the tight, urgent cry of two infants. There on the doorstep, wrapped in an old shawl, sat a wicker basket with a folded scrap of green ribbon tied to the handle. Two tiny booties peeked out. Two small silver pendants were looped on the shawl, each stamped with the same tiny leaf. Leela crouched, fingers trembling, the room full of the smell of wet wool and the distant coal smoke of the street. She felt a tightening in her chest, as if someone had stitched a new seam across her ribs. "I will keep them warm," she said aloud, voice low, and picked them up, closing the door against the night. Years later, at a charity gala glittering with crystal chandeliers and the low murmur of philanthropy, a tall man in a dark suit paused as two children waved at a corner table. The leaf pendants caught the light. He knew that pendant. He had watched one leave his life and never expected to see it again. That single glint would pull a thread that led to hidden papers, to courtroom cameras, and to a choice that would force a city to decide what family truly means. The paperwork came in a blur of stamps and signatures, a bureaucracy that smelled like printer ink and tempered patience. Leela signed as guardian first, with a tremor, and then with steady hands. Her name inked beneath the children's new names, Nora and June. The adoption agency office hummed with soft conversation, the clack of a stapler, the low whir of a fluorescent light. She felt the slip of paper with the children's temporary names in her palm as if it were a talisman. Social worker Marisol explained procedures, her voice soothed by habit. "We will begin with a guardianship, then file for adoption when you are ready," she said. Leela listened, tasting metallic worry, feeling the weight of a legal stamp. At home, the children fit into life like small patches sewn into a larger garment. Nora liked to press her cheek to the sewing machine while it hummed. June learned that the smell of thread meant safety. The leaf pendants rested on a little wooden box atop Leela's dresser, their silver edges dulled but intact. She kept a torn photograph in the box, too, a fragment of paper with a woman's smile and a date hand-scrawled on the back, a mystery she folded into her pocket each night. Leela made lists, scheduled immunizations, learned how to soothe two crying throats at once. She discovered that love, like mending, required patience and the right needle. The days that followed braided into a steady routine of small rituals and tender habits. Mornings began with the hiss of a kettle and the sweet burn of oatmeal, the rooms brightening with sun through the shop window and the sound of neighborhood carts clattering by. The five senses filled each room: the metallic tang of pins in a cushion, the soft thud of small feet on a threadbare rug, the laughter that tasted like warm bread, the scent of lavender sachets tucked into drawers, the feel of little hands seeking hers. Leela hummed while she worked, and the machine answered with its steady beat. Nora and June learned to sort fabric swatches by color and to thread needles with earnest concentration. Dialogue wove through these days like running stitch. "Can I try?" Nora asked one morning, eyes bright. "Wait, watch first," Leela replied, guiding her tiny fingers. "Feel how it moves," Leela said, "like a heart." "It rumbles," June declared, giggling. "It is alive," Leela whispered, and the children nodded as if understanding an ancient truth. Leela taught them to mend socks, to fold hems, to count stitches. She read stories aloud each night, voices low, turning the living room into a theater of blankets and pillows. Neighbors came by. Mateo from the bakery brought stale rolls and a grin. Mrs. Hargreave from the bookstore lent picture books. Officer Sam checked in with a friendly Maud. The town's reactions became a chorus. "She did what any of us would," said Pastor Reed. "They look happy," said Clara from the post office. "Leela saved them," whispered old Mrs. Jenkins at the market. A small mural of community names formed in Leela's mind, like stitches in a hem, each person adding color and support. As the girls grew, questions began to surface that could not be sewn away. One afternoon, while washing a blanket, Leela found a photograph tucked into the seam, edges frayed, the image partly burned. The photo showed a man at a harbor, his jawline familiar in a way that made Leela's chest tighten, and a half-folded note with a single line of handwriting: "Find her if you can." The leaf pendant had a tiny engraving on the back that matched numbers scratched into the inside rim of an old ring Leela had found with the shawl. At night, the air tasted of iron and old paper as she turned the items under lamplight, tracing the engraving with a fingertip. The girls asked questions, voices small and bright. "Who is he?" Nora asked, fingers on the pendant. "Maybe someone who loved you," Leela answered, and the answer felt both true and incomplete. Doubt threaded itself through lullabies. She called Marisol and then the agency again, leaving messages that folded into silence. A lost file here, missing record there, doors that closed with polite apologies. The mystery grew like mildew under wallpaper, not yet visible to others, but persistent and spreading at the edges. Lila pressed the items into the wooden box and taped it closed, as if that simple act could stitch shut the uncertainty. At a charity gala held in the town's old opera house, the air smelled of roses and champagne, of polished wood and wool coats. Lila would not have gone except for an invitation from a patron who wanted to help fund sewing classes. She took the girls, dressed them in soft blue dresses, the leaf pendants catching the light. The room was full of murmured toasts and the warm clink of glasses. He stood near the stage, tall, composed, his suit cut with the certainty of wealth. His name was Thomas Everett, a CEO reputed for both industry and absence. He had a presence like glass, clear and cold, and yet when his eyes landed on the pendants, he went still. Dialogue at the gala stretched, an exchange of glances that became words. "Those pendants," he said, voice low, approaching the table. "Where did you get them?" Lila answered, handing him the pendant as if offering a question. "My girls found them at my shop," she said. "I have kept them safe." He looked at the girls, then back at Lila. "I need to know," he said. "Please, tell me everything." She swallowed. "They were left on my door. There was a note and a photograph," Lila said. "I could not leave them." He nodded, a flicker of pain crossing his features. "My heart has been carrying a missing piece," he confessed. "I lost a woman once. I thought I had failed." "Why now?" Lila asked, voice edged with both hope and wariness. "I tried to find her for years," he said. "I never stopped." "Do you have proof?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "I have documents, DNA access, a memory that will not let me rest," he said. "If these girls are mine, I will do whatever is right." The exchange continued, with pauses and glances, each sentence loaded with history. There were 8 exchanges at that table, then more, each one a stitch pulling them closer or holding them apart. The senses crowded the scene: the shimmer of silk, the salt of sweat at a nervy palm, the distant hum of conversation, the bitter edge of coffee carried by a passing waiter, the velvet cushion under the girl's feet. A promise emerged, fragile and loud. He asked to visit. She hesitated and then agreed. The first visits were gentle tests, like trying a new fabric for a dress that must last. He came with a lawyer named Daniel Price and a private aide called Iris. He brought small gifts, a book of sea poems, a toy boat that smelled faintly of varnish. The children reached out with cautious curiosity. Dialogues in their home became measured, a pattern of discovery. "Do you know my name?" Nora asked, voice tipping forward like a question at the hem of a sentence. "You are," he replied slowly. "I have a name too," June said. "I am June," she declared. "You were gone," Leela said to him once, sitting at the sewing table while rain tapped the window like a metronome. "Why did you leave?" "I did not know she was gone," he said, fingers pressed to his temple as if memories were hard to smooth. "There were calls that never reached me, a hospital that told me nothing." "You could have asked more," Leela said quietly. "Maybe I should have," he answered, but part of me was afraid of what I would find. There were 10 exchanges over the following visits, each one marked by small silences, by the smell of boiled linseed from a newly oiled table he had donated, by the feel of the girl's hair in his hands, by the taste of burnt toast after a rushed breakfast shared in the shop. He read to them, taught them to tie shoelaces, sat with them at the sewing machine, hands hovering, then helping. Tension coiled. The town watched, murmurs traveling like loose threads. Some praised him, some mistrusted. Names arose in conversation: Mateo, Marisol, Officer Sam, Pastor Reed, Clara, Mrs. Jenkins, Daniel, Iris. Each had a line to speak, each a small action that shifted the pattern of public opinion. Not everyone welcomed the change. A smear appeared on the shop door one dawn, red paint scrawled across glass. The phone rang with anonymous threats. Then a small fire set near the back alley smoldered, the smell of melted plastic and smoke invading the shop for days. Leela demanded protection. Thomas hired a security guard named Victor, and the town rallied to watch windows. The next moment of tension arrived like a storm front. 2 men approached late one night and tried to pry open the back entrance. Leela confronted them at the threshold, voice raw. "Get away from my home," she shouted, heart pounding like a heavy stitch. "You have no right," one answered, stepping forward, his breath warm with the stink of liquor. "We want what belongs to us," he said. "We want the truth." Leela felt the air taste metallic, the roughness of splintered wood under her palms as she grabbed a broom for defense. The scuffle was brief. Neighbors called the police, lights flashed, and the men fled. After, hands shook as people described the scene. The town's reaction, names repeated in hurried voices. Mateo banged on a pan, Mrs. Jenkins opened her door, Officer Sam took statements. The incident carved fear into the days that followed. It was 550 characters of raw panic and 2 paragraphs of lingering consequence. Leela could not sleep, her fingers worried at seams in the night, and Thomas promised to find out who had ordered the intimidation. The investigation that followed was methodical and clinical, a study of prints, footprints, and digital traces. A detective named Harris collected names, took statements, photographed the door, the smear of paint, the scorched wood. A forensic lab examined fiber and soot, finding minute traces of an industrial solvent consistent with a commercial cleaner used near docks. Technical steps were explained with crisp detail. Samples were preserved under sterile conditions, chain of custody recorded, DNA swabs taken from the shawl and matched against national databases, while handwriting analysts compared the torn note to archived letters. The perito delivered a report that read like a stitch diagram, precise and immutable. The lab returned results that aligned with Everett family records. The technical description ran clear and concise. Samples were logged, negative controls applied, PCR amplification targeted specific markers, and a match probability was calculated with established error margins. The narrative tone here was clinical. The room smelled of antiseptic and ink. The hum of fluorescent light steady, the click of a camera shutter punctuating statements. What emerged in courtrooms and press rooms tested the town's capacity to forgive and to judge. The third moment of tension arrived as a public scene. Televised hearings, neon lights from cameras, the rustle of press passes, and the scent of hot lights on plastic. Witnesses took the stand. Daniel Price cross-examined with the cool efficiency of a practiced tailor fitting a suit. Leela sat with the girls in the front row, hands clenched around a small cloth, the leaf pendants hidden beneath a lapel. Thomas testified in a voice that wavered at first and then steadied. "I thought I had lost them forever," he said. "I searched and searched." "Why did you not use the channels?" asked the prosecutor, the words tasting of lemon and steel. "Because fear kept me paralyzed," he answered, "because I did not know what questions to ask." Friends took the stand. Mateo described how Leela had fed his apprentices. Marisol spoke of the forms and calls. Pastor Reed explained community outreach. Iris detailed the gifts Thomas had left. Opposing counsel presented receipts, travel logs, and evidence of prior neglect. The courtroom smelled of paper and coffee, the sound of a microphone humming, the cold press of fluorescent light. Emotions shifted like fabric being stretched. Testimonies were long, the exchange of words heavy and exacting, each sentence a needle pulling at seams. The judge listened, the jury whispered, cameras rolled. There were moments when Leela wanted to stand and speak, to say that love had been chosen, not sown by blood alone. She did not at first. Then a moment came when she rose, voice steady. "These girls have known nothing but care," she said. "They belong to the life we built together." The verdict would not be immediate. The reveal that altered public perception came when a small, overlooked clue in the original shawl was traced to a clinic ledger. A clerk named Hannah found an old entry, a patient record that matched dates on the torn note. That link, combined with the DNA report, created a chain that made it hard to deny paternity. Press coverage swelled. Headlines asked moral questions, spoke of abandonment, of wealth and responsibility. Community names recurred in op-eds. Clara wrote a column about belonging. Pastor Reed arranged a community meeting. Mrs. Jenkins brought homemade bread to the queue outside the shop. Officer Sam oversaw a peaceful rally. The courtroom drama resolved in a verdict that recognized Thomas Everett as the biological father and admonished parties who had failed the children. But it also recognized Leela as the primary caregiver, whose daily acts defined family. There were reparations in the form of trust funds and public apologies. The antagonist, a distant relative who had profiteered from silence, faced legal consequences. The public reaction was a tapestry of voices, some praising justice, others mourning the cost. After the verdict, the epilogue unfolded in 3 clear moments, each a stitch in time that showed repair, growth, and a future with choices intact. 1 month later, the shop smelled of lemon and new fabric. The pendants hung from a small branch by the window, and the girls returned to routines that included mornings at the sewing table and evenings of storytelling. Thomas visited less like a storm and more like a careful guest, offering help rather than prescriptions. He brought materials for a community workshop and sat beside children teaching them to fold fabric. Leela watched him from the doorway, noticing how he paused before speaking, the way his hands had learned gentleness. The town organized a fundraiser, and the sewing classes expanded a week into a new schedule. Hands that had been unsure now moved with confidence, and Leela found time to breathe between mending and mentoring. She opened a ledger that listed names of those who had supported them, and realized that her life had widened beyond the shop. 3 months later, a small foundation had formed around the idea of teaching trades to women leaving difficult circumstances. Thomas had used his resources to fund scholarships, while Leela co-designed a curriculum that mixed practical skill with emotional support. The ephemera of their ordeal had been cataloged, filed, and turned into lessons. The girls, Nora and June, had friends at school and a steady rhythm of homework and play. They performed a small play at the community center, reciting lines that spoke of gardens and boats and the idea that family could be chosen and built. The town rallied for a spring fair that raised money for the foundation. Names that once whispered doubt now volunteered. Mateo baked pies, Marisol organized records, Pastor Reed offered space for meetings, Officer Sam ran safety workshops, Clara led a reading hour. Leela discovered that the choices she had made in a single raw night had rippled into a living project that would touch others. 6 months later, the change felt like a repair and more like an inheritance. The shop had a new sign that read with modest pride, "Threads of Harbor," and inside a second sewing machine hummed for apprentices. The leaf pendants rested in a small display box labeled with the girls' names, a reminder of origin and survival. Thomas and Leela had forged an uneasy but productive partnership, their interactions now pragmatic and respectful. He had adjusted company policies to support parental leave, citing the story in an internal memo that urged compassion in corporate policy. The foundation operated a small stipend program that sent 5 young people to trade schools. Nora and June volunteered at beginner classes on Saturdays, handing out pins and offering kind guidance. The community was fuller, the shop warm with laughter and the smell of coffee, the sewing machine rhythm steady like a heartbeat.
Leela sometimes sat by the window with a cup of tea, her fingers idly working a thread into a worn patch, thinking about the night she had found the babies. She had once whispered that she would be their thread. Now she saw, with quiet astonishment, how a single act of care had become a pattern worn by many. If you felt your chest tighten watching Leela stitch a life together for Nora and June, you are not alone. Tell us in the comments what moved you most about this story. Begin your reply with the phrase, "Oh, what touched me most was," and then share the small gesture or line that stayed with you. Your words help others feel less alone and encourage us to bring more stories that show courage and care. Your recollections become part of a community that believes in second chances. Now stay with us to see how a leaf pendant, a torn photograph, and a sewing machine changed more than 3 lives. In quiet moments after everything had shifted, Leela reflected on what family truly meant. She had a backstory that was stitched into who she was, and that history had guided choices and hardened resolve. She had grown up in a small coastal home where her mother taught her the rhythm of a needle and her father taught her how to count thread. As a child, she watched a seam rip and learned patience. As a teenager, she mended her first coat and felt pride. And as a young adult, she carried solitude like a pocketed stone. She left school early to work full-time to pay rent, learning quick hands and a slower heart. The loss she carried was not of 2 infants discovered on a doorstep, but of a brother who had vanished at sea, a wound that taught her not to leave those in need. She had trained herself to be steady, to hold small things through storms, to make a shelter from flimsy materials. When she found the twins, she said yes to an instinct honed by years of small rescues. Her formation was practical and quiet, filled with thrift store finds and late-night hemming for extra coins. The present found her surrounded by apprentices and children,
her small shop now a place where hands learn to live again. She kept love as a tool, and with it she altered fate. The final image is simple and resonant. A small wooden box sits on a windowsill, the leaf pendants resting inside as if waiting for a new hand to touch them. Outside, Harbor Street moves on with its ordinary clatter, but the people who inhabit it carry a new story about what it means to step forward and to not look away. The verdict brought accountability, the investigation uncovered truth, and the community created a scaffold for better days. A machine that once hummed to mend socks now teaches purpose. The responsible parties were confronted in court, and the legal system recorded failures and mandates. Yet what endures is a quieter justice, lived in daily breakfasts, in a workshop where a beginner's trembling finger finds the eye of a needle, and in the way 2 sisters braid hair together, unaware of the storms that once swirled around them. If this story matters to you, consider sharing it so more people might hear that love is an action, not just a label, and that ordinary choices can reweave lives. The thread that binds family is not always blood. Sometimes it is a choice made at midnight, a warm cup of tea, and the steady refusal to walk away.